let's see. How about so I only have one monitor. I'm used to having my two monitors, and so I'm having to switch
Oh,
back
are
and
you
forth.
in the new house?
No.
Oh,
No, this is an empty room. We're still unloading.
I thought you needed to decorate a little.
Yeah, it's pretty bare in here.
Nice ceiling.
Um yeah, it's kind of like I'm coming to you from a cave. Let's see. I lost my okay, here we go. So how about this? How about Miller, do you mind being the liturgist?
Sure.
And Paula, would you be voice of the people?
Gladly.
And let's see. Rob, will you do the Isaiah reading, the Hebrew Bible reading?
Sure.
And I will do the Gospel of John reading. Okay. So great. Well, let me go ahead and get the liturgy up on the screen. So those of you who are tuning in via Facebook or YouTube, also just want to say a quick welcome. If you're on one of the streaming services, feel free to just click like or comment with where you're watching from. That gives us a way to count you. So,
Well,
um,
Dave, the chat in Zoom also needs to be
oh,
opened up.
oh, thank you. I haven't. Thank you. Thank you about that. All right, let's see. I think, sorry about that, guys. I think now everyone should be able to talk.
Cool.
All right. Ready when you are, Miller.
All right. Today is January 19th, and Father George Coyne, Vatican astrophysicist, was born on this day in 1933 in Baltimore. He was adamant that faith and science can coexist, but found resistance from both militant atheists and a stubborn church leadership. He rejected so-called intelligent design theory in favor of a theology of God's radical openness. Father Coyne died in 2020. Today also marks the birthday of theologian Colin Gunton in 1941, who wrote influential books about the Trinity. On January 19th, 1953, Lucille Ball became the first woman to give birth on live television. Her son was delivered by C-section, and the event became part of her show, I Love Lucy.
I'm gonna pause you real quick, just because I felt like that needed to be part of church history. I mean, this is
Yeah,
like this
Oh,
is
it
like
does, but she
pretty
did
badass.
not give birth on live TV. She
right.
fake gave birth.
Okay, yeah, but it was like scheduled for the same day, and the event became part of it, right? Wasn't that part of the thing?
I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, but it's like this is like, this is a big deal it's like first person on the moon kind of stuff, really. It was
Yeah, oh my gosh.
yeah, yeah. All right.
But her and Ricky still had twin beds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. All right, go ahead.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Today's responsive reading comes from Psalm 25, 5 through 10. Your loyal love, Lord, extends to the skies.
Your faithfulness reaches the clouds.
Your righteousness is like the strongest mountains.
Your justice is like the deepest sea.
Lord, you save both humans and animals.
Your faithful love is priceless, God.
Humanity finds refuge in the shadow of your wings.
They feast on the bounty of your house.
You let them drink from your river of pure joy.
Within you is the spring of life. In your light, we see light. Extend your faithful love to those who know you. Oh, excuse me.
Extend your righteousness to those whose heart is right.
And today's Hebrew Bible reading comes from Isaiah chapter 62. For Zion's sake, I won't keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake, I won't sit still until her righteousness shines out like a light, and her salvation blazes like a torch. Nations will see your righteousness, all kings your glory. You will be called by a new name, which the Lord's own mouth will determine. You will be a splendid garland in the Lord's hand, a royal turban in the palm of God's hand. You will no longer be called abandoned, and your land will no longer be called deserted. Instead, you will be called, My delight is in her, and your land married, because the Lord delights in you. Your land will be cared for once again. As a young man marries a young woman, so your sons will marry you. With the joy of a bridegroom because of his bride, so your God will rejoice because of you.
Our gospel reading is from the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. When the wine ran out, Jesus' mother said to him, "They don't have any wine." Jesus replied, "Woman, what does that have to do with me? My time hasn't come yet." His mother told the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby were 6 stone water jars used for the Jewish cleansing ritual, each able to hold about 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some from them and take it to the headwaiter." And they did. The headwaiter tasted the water that had become wine. He didn't know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The headwaiter called the groom and said, "Everyone serves the good wine first. They bring out the second-rate wine only when the guests are drinking freely. You kept the good wine until now." This was the first miraculous sign that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. He revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
George Coyne wrote, "If they respect the results of modern science, and indeed the best of modern biblical research, religious believers must move away from the notion of a dictator God or a designer God, a Newtonian God who made the universe as a watch that ticks along regularly. Perhaps God should be seen more as a parent, or as one who speaks encouraging and sustaining words."
So thank you for getting us started with worship. We'll move into a time of prayer. I will get us started with prayer. And those of you, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, if you'd like to lift up a prayer request, feel free to put it in the comments. I'll keep an eye on YouTube. If Rob, do you mind looking at Facebook? Okay.
Yep, I've got it up.
Thank you. Let's go to God in prayer. Creator God and source of life, you draw all things toward yourself. We name you love because you hold the universe together, and you keep calling us toward you. We lift up to you all those who are suffering today, those who are struggling with the future, with anxiety, those who are struggling with the past, with depression and regret. We lift up to you those who are struggling in the present, who are experiencing literal hell on earth. We're grateful to see a ceasefire after many, many months of prayer come about in Gaza. We ask that this might lead to a lasting peace with justice. God, we lift up to you all those who are displaced, whether that's by natural disaster or war or poverty from predatory capitalism. And we ask you, Lord, to change the hearts and minds of those with money and political power so that they care for the least of these. We lift up to you ourselves in this time of national transition. Ask that you give us wisdom and courage, that we find delight in the moments and the world that you give us, strength for whatever happens next. Equanimity in times good and bad. Help us to follow the path of your saints who've walked before us and to meet whatever happens with love and courage. God, we lift up to you ourselves and the planet, the perils of climate change, and all the things that are on our hearts. And I invite those of you who are listening to share.
For Keith and Marilyn Rainey,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for firefighters still fighting fires in California,
Lord, hear our prayer.
For trans folks as this new administration begins.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Gratitude for healing for Connie.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Prayers for those who are going to be dealing with the threat of deportation or other terrifying interactions with the state.
Lord, hear our prayer. Prayer for those with no home being in the elements this week.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the family of Anthony G.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For those wrestling with grief,
Lord, hear our prayer. For the resistance,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for the church and religious leaders to find their voices,
Lord, hear our prayer. For the people and staff of Discovery United Methodist,
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for all those things that we've named and for all those that are unnamed and for the prayers that we have a hard time putting into words, we give you thanks that you hear and that you answer. And we join together in the prayer that Jesus taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So I'm glad that we get this story kicking off. I guess it's not yet ordinary time, but kicking off the time after Christmas, that John has Jesus start his ministry at a wedding. And this is after, he's gone and collected disciples, so he's got a entourage now. He and the disciples go to this wedding, and and it's important that his first, like the opening scene, opening big event here in the Gospel of John is a wedding. Of course, it's going to end with a crucifixion and resurrection, and Mary and Jesus in the garden, and then Jesus giving breakfast to the disciples. I mean, there's other good stuff, but this story, this is one of my favorite ways that to start a gospel. It's a wedding. I like to think about the most enjoyable times at weddings I've been to. And I have a couple on mind. I will say, I was hoping Tony was going to be here because the anniversary of his wedding was really a fantastic party. It was a big party, happened in a aircraft museum, so that there's airplanes and all this stuff around, and people are dancing. There was a drag show. I mean, they did it up right. It was a lot of fun. Um, Another wedding that comes to mind, oh, Megan's wedding that I went to, which was around Christmas time, and she had Santa Claus there at the wedding. That was brilliant. Um, and one particular wedding memory I have is my nephew Donnie's wedding, where Ruth, my wife's mother, who lived with us for several years, um, actually danced, which, like, she said, I think she had never seen her mother actually dance, but she danced, and she's out there with her cane, and um, we were dancing to funky music. It was just amazing. Those are beautiful memories. And I'll say, I think it's interesting. I mean, those are American weddings, but back in the day, weddings would last 2 or 3 days. I'm going to be honest. I understand um, my party meter gets full pretty quick. 3 hours is about as much as I can take. 2 or 3 days, which is what is normal in some parts of the world or in the past. They run out of wine. They're afraid the party's going to have to end early. And there's a little detail stashed in here. I just think it's important to notice that they fill up 20 to 30 gallon stone jars of water. So a minimum of 120 gallons of wine, maybe 180 gallons of wine. Think about how expensive that would be, first of all, and how long Jesus intends this party to last. There's either a whole lot of people there or they're going to be partying for a long time. Either way, oh my gosh. I mean, there's almost no way to baptize this miracle and make it appropriate for church. For most people, I mean, this is scandalous. We're going to make this party last all week, Jesus says, as his first miracle. That's a brilliant story. What an amazing story. Now, of course, as you go back, there's a lot of references to weddings as a symbol of the kingdom. Of course, our Isaiah passage that Rob read this morning, the idea was a reunification, a party. This was a national party. This was Israel's exiles coming home. This was a victory. This a celebration. And again, the idea was this was going to be not just heartwarming, but a time for partying, for celebration. Jesus, of course, uses stories of wedding parties as a metaphor for the kingdom in several occasions. There's an idea that this is somehow a picture of what God wants for the world. This moment of celebration where everything is right, where silly things, delightful things happen. Santa Claus comes to the wedding. People who don't usually dance get up and dance. It's that kind of thing. The idea that Jesus is so committed to this idea of celebration that he would, as his first miracle, give a wedding 120 gallons of wine. What kind of God do we worship? That's the kind of person I would follow. That's the kind of religious leader I would say, yes, Whatever you're selling, I'll buy it. That's great. I want to follow that leader. What a beautiful image. And it points up how stodgy most of our religion is, you know? Just how boring as paste most religion is. I want to teach you something that I think is really a powerful tool. This is actually, I can't remember the psychologist. I looked at his name just 30 minutes ago and I've already forgotten it. I'll have to look it up again. It's a technique that you do when you're in a moment, which is so powerful and beautiful and things are right with the world, when you notice that you're happy. And it's called the HEAL technique, HEAL. And the idea is when you notice in the moment that you're happy, that you're delighted, the H is for have the experience. So the idea is come into an awareness. Oh, this is what life is supposed to be about. Now, this could happen anytime. It could happen on a hike. You look out over a vista and you see a sunset and it looks, postcard like, except it's, 360 degrees and Dolby surround sound. So you've got those moments when you are overwhelmed by nature and you're in awe. Or it could be a quiet moment. For me, it's sitting on the porch swing, drinking tea and watching hummingbirds. You know, it could be at a wedding when you are with, this is the thing, like the only time you're with family, this many people, friends and family, or weddings and funerals, right? So the wedding's a good time to be with them. You look at them and you're like, oh, look, I can see my community, all these people I'm attached to, my relatives and friends, and a few people I don't like, but they're all here, and I feel connected to humanity in this beautiful space, right? I mean, that's those moments in weddings or celebrations, Christmas Eve services, Easter services, whatever that happens to be, where you look at and you feel like, oh, I'm part of this. I'm part of this bigger thing. I'm connected to all these wonderful people. So you have the experience, you notice it, right? The E is for extend the experience. So you try to make it last longer, right? You're out with friends, you're enjoying their company, and they say, "Hey, why don't we go out for donuts?" Don't 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 say, "No, no, I'm tired." Go, extend the experience. If you have the opportunity, drag it out longer. And this is where what I see Jesus doing in this moment. Let's make this last longer, 3 or 4 days. Why not? He extends the experience in this miraculous way. So the idea is you say yes to the experience. You keep going with it. You're on a hike and there's a spur, a trail, and someone says, "Do you want to go down this way and look?" Go down that way and look, right? The A is for amplify the experience. So again, you've noticed it, you're extending it, really revel in, oh, this is what it's about. And you want to take a moment to notice some of the details, like really zoom in when you're looking over the vista, look at a particular area, absorb the colors, right? Take some deep breaths, get the air up in your nostrils. You amplify the experience. Again, I think this is what Jesus was doing when he gave them another 120 gallons of wine. He's saying, let's not just let's keep it going, let's get the good wine out, right? He amplifies it. It's a better experience now. And the L is for link. So as you're sitting there, having the experience, extending it and amplifying it, you link it to something in the future or something in your life. So you say, next time I'm sitting down to do my taxes, I'm going to remember this moment, what life is actually about. Or the next time I'm, sitting in a place and I'm bored and I'm waiting for the doctor, I'm going to put down my cell phone and I'm going to remember this moment. The linking is really important because it's part of what helps us bring the past into the present, or those moments that remind us when we have clarity. bring it into the moment. And I think that's why we tell this story. Like, I mean, I think that's why we tell this story about the wedding, Jesus's first miracle. I mean, there was a lot of terrible crap that Jesus was going to go through, right? There's a lot of controversy and fighting and arguing, and he had to deal with jerks and go through pain and betrayal. It's a good way to start the ministry, right? With a celebration that I'm sure he could remember later on when he's sitting down with the disciples at the Last Supper and they're doing this thing, they're passing out the wine and the bread. Jesus is like, yeah, I remember that wedding where we were all together. Wasn't that a moment? I can imagine them talking about that. It doesn't get put in the text, but oh, remember the wedding? Remember that moment? I think that's part of what's so important about this story and why we're still telling it 2,000 years later. I think it's why John sticks it at the front end of his gospel, a moment of celebration, a humorous moment, something that we remember when times are rough. And since we're kind of on the cusp of a rough time, I think it's good to remember why we do this stuff. I mean, the whole idea is we're moving toward a wedding. It's good to have the weddings of the past. It's good to take a moment when you're in that moment, when you're having the experience, to put a pin in this moment, plant a flag, say this is a holy moment. This isn't just a moment of drunken debauchery. This isn't just a party. This isn't just a passing feeling of happiness that's irrelevant to the bigger picture of the world. No, these moments of joy are why we're here. Like that's part of why we are in this place, to have those moments. So heal technique, have the moment, extend it, amplify it, link it. I think that's what Jesus is doing in this miracle. Again, we could get into the symbolism of the blood of Christ. We could get into, the communion stuff. We could make it holy. Oh, give me a break. Let him have some fun. That's my that's my sermon for you today. Okay. I'd love to hear your reflections, reactions.
You said it was almost impossible for the church to baptize that.
Mhm.
They do.
I do, right?
Growing
Yeah.
up Baptist, I was told over and over that it wasn't wine, it was grape juice, but they just did not have a good word for unfermented grape juice, so they had to put wine.
Mm.
Uh, and especially once I got to seminary, I came to the conclusion that there are a whole lot of Baptist Gnostics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we want to clean Jesus up so much that we take his humanity away from him.
But yes.
And that is as much of a heresy as anything. uh,
Yeah. I think Jesus was like, no, I want more people to dance. Like he's just making it go. He's like, everyone get on the dance floor. Like this is, the DJ puts on the really bumping tunes. Let's all get out there. I really feel like this is part of I want to because you said that, Paul, about the grape juice. I want to share just a quick anecdote. When I was in the first time in 2011 when I was in the Middle East and we were going out on Lake Galilee. I mean, this is traditional thing. People go out on the Lake of Galilee and they have communion. All right. And so we had to go shopping to get the bread and the wine. But I go into the store and because we've got Episcopal folks, we got Methodist folks, we got Baptist folks. I went into the store because I was going to be leading communion. And I said, do you have any grape juice? And the store owner was like, well, yeah. And he gestures at the wine. And I said, no, I mean, like, I said, do you have any unfermented grape juice? And he went,
wow.
what? And I was, which just, I was slain. I laughed. I bought the wine. We went out and we had wine for communion. It was like, I know the bishop and my district superintendent probably would give me a pass to be in the Holy Land and use wine for communion, even though I'm not supposed to. Anyway, I just thought the question, why? Anyway, go ahead, Miller.
Yeah. Um, so like I I think this sort of ties into the wedding imagery in the Bible has always kind of squicked me out because of how it's been presented to me, I think, as this very like contractual, gendered, like there's like rules for like, you must give up everything and be, under the umbrella of protection or whatever. Anyway, like
Yes. Yes.
the submission element,
Yes.
like, but nobody really talks about the fact that like a wedding is a party. Like the wedding itself is a
Yes.
party. And I think that like we've sort of taken this into communion as well. It seems like a very contractual, like you must do this to be in good standing kind of thing. Like,
Right.
or you can only do this if you're in good standing. But like what was Jesus really doing at the first communion? He was having a party. Like, I mean, it was sort of a a quiet, somber party, but like it
Yeah.
was a gathering, like a remembering of, their cultural history, like for Passover, but
Mhm.
also like, hey, whenever you're together, do this.
Mhm.
You guys should eat and drink together.
Mhm.
Like this is what communion is. It's
Yeah.
about sitting around a
Yes.
table and sharing stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think
And
we forget that element of communion.
absolutely. And he was linking. He was linking. Do this in remembrance of me. He was like,
And
when you do this, remember this moment. Yeah.
and I may have totally misremembered. I'm sorry, Rob, you go. You've got your hands up.
No, go ahead, finish your thought.
Well, uh, I may be misremembering this. Uh, the Jewish people were so much more earthy than us. And
Hmm.
at a wedding, the first night of the bride and groom, I have read that people gathered around the room they were in to listen to the noises, and then afterwards went in to examine the sheets to make sure they were bloody. Uh,
Right.
they weren't hung up about sex.
No, right, exactly. The whole idea was they're out there still partying while the couple is consummating their wedding. It's like they're, it's the we're yeah, you guys do what you're gonna do. We're gonna keep partying. Anyway, go ahead, Rob.
So, speaking of um, Jesus' humanity and it being taken away, uh, something that has always struck me about this story. So, like you were alluding to, he's gotten some followers, like, something's brewing, right?
Mhm.
And so then there's this conversation that he has with his mom. And it's clear that he's been noodling on what his next steps should be,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And he doesn't think this is the next step. At the very least, you can infer this is not what he was thinking,
Yeah.
right? He's probably been noodling on, okay, what is the right place to start divulging the kingdom, in this as a present thing, what kind of healing and inclusion.
Mhm.
But like, so this really human experience is when people know you better than you know yourself.
Mm.
And it takes his mom to draw this out of him and be like, no, you got this all wrong, kid.
Yeah.
You got this all wrong. You haven't realized what you want to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so to build on that, what I think is really, really important here is when it says there were 6 of those stone jars. It doesn't then say, Jesus said, take one of the stone jars,
Right.
take 2 of the stone jars, right?
Hmm.
He doesn't edit it.
Yeah.
It's just fill up
To the
as much
brim.
as we can hold.
To the
Yeah,
brim. Yeah.
yeah. It is a much, much different story if it's, well, take one of the jars.
Yes.
And I feel like that's the reading between the lines
Mhm.
that we conventionally do. People read it as if he said, take one of the jars.
Yes.
Take one of the jars, and we'll put water in it and we'll turn it into grape juice because have you seen these people? These people are absolutely faced. We need to get this wrapped up, but I get it. It's only 10. Have a jar on me, guys. Have a jar on me.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
let's start winding this up.
yes, yes,
That's not the story.
right.
This story ends with people waking up in bushes.
Like it blew.
Absolutely.
It makes me think of, I mean, there is this element of like we're not, so they even highlight the sort of element of scarcity when the head waiter is talking about like
Yeah,
normally you give people the good stuff, they get drunk, then they don't care, you can just give them whatever, like,
right.
vinegar. Anyway, like, and they'll just keep on drinking because they're drunk. But
Yeah.
there's like Jesus is bringing in this like sort of element of abundance of like this, yeah, of course there's enough to go around. There's 6 jars, 6
Hmm.
giant jars of
Hmm.
the greatest wine you've ever tasted, probably.
Yeah.
Like,
Like
Yes.
this underlying message is just stop worrying about it.
Yes.
yeah,
They
stop worrying
probably
about
didn't manage
scarcity.
to drink it all.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly. There probably was stuff left. I mean, it's like the miracle of the loaves and fishes, right? There's probably leftover, right? There's so much abundance. I think you're right. I mean, I think that's part of this thing is this is not a stingy miracle. This is a more than you could possibly want miracle. And our tendency to just stingify everything, and as you said, Miller, like again, it highlights that our usual mode of thinking is scarcity. Okay, let's do the good stuff, and when people are really soused, they won't notice when we slip in the low grade stuff. Although I gotta say, I really like the $2 wine from Aldi, so it's pretty good. But the idea is like this is the expensive stuff. There's not any scarcity mindset here, and I also want to come back to what you said, Rob. The idea. I mean, as you said, it's clear like Jesus has something else in mind, and it takes his mom to say, "Okay, this is you need to do something about this," and he's probably thinking, "Oh, there's a healing. There's this person, 2 or 3 lepers. I'll go heal them on Tuesday or Saturday, and people will be like really amazed." And she preempts him. I mean, so much for predestination and divine foreknowledge and all this, like earlier in John, he's walking around like, yeah, I saw you while you were under the fig tree. And Philip's like, wow, how'd you know that? And here it's his mom says, hey, take care of this. And he's like, oh, mom, I love that. What a beautiful story. Again, it humanizes the divine. Like this is what God's about. God's not about your pre-planned, scheduled, holy looking stuff. It's about answering the need of the moment, which in this case happens to be a party. Oh yeah, go ahead, Rob.
Something else that really comes to mind here because when we start talking about scarcity versus abundance, so I remember reading. I think this is something that C.S. Lewis actually wrote about, right? That it's important that the miracles that are attributed to Jesus are not just arbitrary magic.
Hmm.
That it's not just, oh, look, a stone and boom, now it's, flowers, right?
Hmm.
That the miracles that are attributed to Jesus are things that we can do and the natural world can do. It's just it takes us longer, there's more steps involved, right? But we know how to grow things. The earth produces things. We can make wine, right? We
Yeah.
know about getting grape juice and fermenting it and making wine. We
Mhm.
know about treating illness, and having healing community, right?
Yeah.
Um, so it's not magic exactly, right? And so something that really jumps out at me from that here when we talk about scarcity and abundance is this is also a depiction of the abundance that we live with, the fact that there is enough. There's a message here that it doesn't just take a miracle for there to be enough. The miracle is showing us the abundance that is already present, right?
Yeah.
That that we don't need somebody to come along and do magic for there to actually be enough for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, to your point, I'm sure there's 120 gallons of wine at the Fortress Antonia, or, someplace nearby, it's certainly, but yeah, absolutely. It highlights the abundance that we live with just as being part of God's creation. I think it's a good point. Other thoughts about this text?
I
Oh,
think the
by the way,
story.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Rick Hansen was the name of the psychologist that came up with a HEAL technique, HEL technique. So I just felt like I needed to give credit where credit is due. I think I may have changed one of the words to, he said absorb instead of amplify, but yeah.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I think this is also another story where we could point to the fact that it's possible that Mary is the one who radicalized Jesus. I mean, there's the divine impulse and all that, but like the idea of, I mean, she was the one saying the Magnificat, while she was still pregnant with him. Presumably she shared her ideologies with him,
Right.
and the fact that he's willing to take her lead, the idea that she's like, come on, Jesus, this is it, get it started.
Yeah.
And that it was this that she wanted. She wanted it to be like this show of abundance for everyone, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Can we notice how much this shows us that divine response of abundance in response to a very human request? Like, again, that so much of the theology just acts like all the agency belongs to God, right? And we're just kind of along for the ride.
Right. Yeah.
But this is actually gigantically mutual. He wasn't even going to do it.
Right. Right.
Until she said it was important to her.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, because you can imagine the way that we normally create hierarchies of need, what's an important need versus an unimportant need. Like I can, the woman who, anoints Jesus with the costly ointment, and someone says, or what, supposedly Judas, but one of the disciples said, "Hey, why this waste? Why are you wasting this?" And his response is like, this is not unimportant. Like this is a big deal. In fact, this is where I'm going to choose to do this miracle. I mean, and again, like you can totally see someone saying, don't waste God's time with this. I mean, so they run out of wine, they go home early. Good, they need to sober up anyway. It would just that kind of automatic religious dismissal of, whereas, this is a human need. As you said, other people have pointed out, like, Jesus and all his disciples were there. So, I mean, that's a good, it's 13 people drinking up the wine. So maybe they crashed, and maybe, no, I'm teasing. But, they were invited. They're part of the guests. So there's a lot of people. It's probably a pretty large gathering. And if you weren't a good host, if you didn't provide sufficiently for your guests, that could have been socially embarrassing. And so part of, Jesus's concern is not just to keep the party going, but he's helping the bridegroom or the families save face, What an interesting, I'm going to deploy my miraculous powers so you guys aren't embarrassed in the community. Anyway, yeah.
Shelby has an interesting comment on Facebook talking about communion. Miller was making some observations about contractualism and stuff, where stuff was very fraught, and like the celebratory element, the communal element really gets taken out of it, right?
Yeah.
So Shelby says, communion always made me feel so unworthy and convicted. It was
Mm.
never joyful because I was too sinful and at risk of being permanently condemned if I didn't fully repent before partaking.
And
Yeah.
Peter said, "Can you talk about the significance of my time has not yet come? And is there any significance that he used vessels intended for washing?"
Yeah. Well, let me roll back first on Shelby's comment. Was it Shelby that said that?
Yeah.
Yeah, Shelby's comment, absolutely. I mean, communion is often presented as this kind of dirge, dismal time. I mean, you are remembering Christ's sacrifice and that it's this dark, heavy. And if you read the story of the Last Supper, there is that kind of, that Maundy Thursday, I'm going to take off my I'm going to wash your feet. You know, he loved them completely. He loved his disciples to the end. I mean, there is that kind of uh, melancholy sheen when you're reading it that way. But it's a supper. It was a Passover supper. I mean, it's the Passover celebration where we're saying God is delivering us. Tonight is the night that we are going to escape Pharaoh's oppression and be liberated. And we're remembering that. We're remembering how we, used to be slaves and now we're going to be free. That they say that every year. And so it is a time of celebration. We are remembering our history and we're moving forward with this idea that God is looking out for us. Um, yeah, I mean, I think it should be celebratory. Or let me say this: you got all the feels. You got the melancholy and the joyful, and you're right. I think a lot of times it's presented as just on the morose, melancholy side, guilt kind of stuff instead of the celebration.
Yeah, growing up, it was presented more of not this is the time to remember Christ's sacrifice, but this is the time to remember everything you've done wrong since the
Mhm.
last time you took communion and ask forgiveness for it.
Right. So that you don't partake in it unworthily. Right.
Yes.
And I recognize that's part of the liturgy, but at the same time, Jesus is breaking bread with Judas. I mean, if Judas is let in, why not me? Um, so I mean, I think that's part of the beauty of the moment. Like he's not saying, no sauce for you, Judas, you know, dip your own bread in your own wine. Anyway. Um,
And
yeah,
Peter's, my time has not yet come, and significance of the vessels used for washing.
yeah. Thank you, Peter. I think so. There's a lot of folks have talked about, the rituals of, yeah, these were vessels used for purification, as it says in the beginning. That Jesus is doing something new here. There's, quote, old covenant. These are the vessels for purification, and this is really a new sacrament. This is something new you're going to be doing with wine. It's prefiguring communion. Again, I just talked about at the Last Supper when Jesus washes the disciples' feet. That there is something kind of, um, I would say there's many layered symbols in this event. John especially knows. I mean, John's the one that's going to tell the story about Jesus's foot washing in the end. So that's part of this. That's part of the story, I think. I'm always a little bit reluctant to go into the Old and New Covenant stuff because it gets a little supersessionist, meaning, we Christians are replacing the faulty religion of the Jews and their focus on purity and ritual. I mean, we got our own focuses on purity and ritual, some of which I wish we would leave behind. But there's, but I do think John has this kind of multi-layered symbolic thing going on. Later on, when he's stabbed in the side, blood and water is going to come out, right? So there's again multi-layered symbols. As for time has not yet come, I mean, I think that's Jesus spends a lot of time talking about my time. Uh, Even later in the gospel, in John's gospel, he'll say, um, like I can't remember exactly the phrasing, but he talks about when I'm lifted up. He's anticipating when my hour has come, that sort of thing. But
Well,
I
even with his birth, it starts out in the fullness of time.
mhm.
And
Sure.
when he says, my time has not yet come, maybe he's referring to that, going, and maybe Jesus had had a little too much to drink and wasn't ready to start trying to do miracles.
I hadn't thought about that. Maybe he's like, this is not the time, Mom. I am not. I've
I
got a
had
pretty
that
healthy
thought.
buzz going on here. Maybe I
Or,
need to.
or well, that, and also just the thought of like, I mean, this is, he's at a party, it's a wedding. Like, there could be just an element of not wanting to risk making this about him.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
He doesn't want to steal their thunder, so he's but I mean, Mom prevails on him, and he decides he can get this done quietly, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't
Um,
exactly stand up and be like, whoosh,
Behold.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Although
Okay,
now we're
everybody,
telling the
gather
story about
round
it.
for
So
my next trick.
Right. Well, and John is a signs gospel where Jesus does give signs. In Mark's gospel, Jesus does not give signs. They come asking for a sign. He says, I'm not giving you a sign. The only sign you get is the sign of Jonah. And like you look like he's always trying to hide the miracles or stuff them under. And John's like, this is the first sign Jesus did. This is the second sign. So John is referred to as a signs gospel. So I do think that part of it is like Jesus has a strategy about. But the other thing I would say is apparently he was wrong. My time has not yet come. Mary's like, no, Bon, this is your time. So, and I know a lot of churches get really upset if I said, apparently Jesus was wrong because his mom was right. Anyway, yeah. Oh, right, right. Peter says, and only the servants knew. He did. He hid it. Or at least, I mean, we know apparently someone let it leak, but but only the servants knew. The head waiter didn't know. The
That's not the kind of thing you can keep secret.
Right, right. The groom or the person in charge didn't know. Yeah. And you're right. He didn't say, behold, water to wine. It was
I
just,
am I am
this is good
suddenly
stuff.
thinking. I mean,
Go
since
ahead.
since they're commenting on how good the wine is, right?
Yes.
As people start drinking it, assuming that they're not just completely under the table,
Yeah.
uh, you can't imagine like people are going to start talking, and it's going to be like they must have spent a fortune on this wedding.
Yes. Right. Yes.
the
Absolutely.
family is like, no, we didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, we did. Yeah, we totally did.
Right. Right. Yes. I also want to emphasize as a pastor, I read like the average cost of a wedding is in the, like $25,000. And I would always tell couples, like, I will give you the $50 discount. Like, if I don't have to do a wedding rehearsal, if you do a destination wedding or something like that, fly me out there. But I will do your wedding for $50. I'll even do the premarital counseling if you don't spend $25,000. Because we also know the more a wedding costs, the more likely they're not going to stay together. So just FYI, apparently that's a statistic that the more you spend on a wedding, the less likely it is to last. So anyway. So I didn't mean to like dump cold water on this whole miracle thing, but
Can you give the bonus of like creating more wine?
yeah, right, right. Then you got more money to spend on the wine. Yeah.
Is this
Anyway,
a service you can offer?
yes, right, right. Oh boy. I think it's a good place for us to wrap up. How about we'll go ahead and pull the liturgy back up on the screen. Um, let's see. Well, I thought I was. I'm not sure why I have a prayer from St. Patrick here, but we're going to go with it.
It's cool. From the prayer of St. Patrick. Christ with me, Christ before me, Christ behind me, Christ in me, Christ beneath me, Christ above me, Christ on my right, Christ on my left, Christ when I lie down, Christ when I sit down, Christ in the heart of everyone who thinks of me, Christ in the mouth of everyone who speaks of me, Christ in the eye that sees me, Christ in the ear that hears me. I arise today through a mighty strength, the invocation of the Trinity, through a belief in the threeness, through a confession of the oneness of the Creator of creation. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
All right. Thank you all for being with us in worship today. Thanks especially if you've tuned in via one of the streaming services on YouTube or Facebook. Again, if you've been watching, just if you don't mind, click like or comment with where you're watching from. That gives us a way to count you. I think I'm not. I think I may have put the Trinity in there because of the. I think I may use St. Patrick because of the other theologian who wrote about the Trinity, but I don't remember. That was earlier in the week, and I've already forgotten any logic I had, or I might have just used a March template. I don't remember. So thank you all for being with us today. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream, and if you're on Zoom, you can stick around for just a minute.